The story of ancient Egypt begins not with kings and pyramids, but with a river that cut across the desert and brought life to a land that otherwise would have been barren. The Nile flowed steadily through the sands, bringing water and fertile soil to its banks and allowing people to settle and thrive. Each year the river flooded, spilling rich silt across the land, and farmers learned to depend on this rhythm of nature. It was this cycle that gave birth to one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. Without the Nile there would be no Egypt, and without Egypt the world would lack many of the wonders we now take for granted. Generations of families lived and died along this river, building villages and towns that slowly grew into cities. They watched the waters rise and fall, and they understood the power of the river so well that they came to see it as sacred. In their minds it was not simply a stream of water, but a gift from the gods and a lifeline to eternity. To live near the Nile was to live at the center of the universe, for it was here that life could be nurtured in an unforgiving desert. The people adapted quickly to the challenges of their environment. They mastered irrigation, digging canals and building basins, so the water could reach farther than the immediate banks. Crops of wheat, barley and flax grew strong and reliable, and animals were raised to provide food and labor. With food security came the chance to dream of more than survival. Families could plan for the future, and communities could flourish. Over time, these communities became organized under leaders who managed land disputes, controlled water usage, and guided religious practices. From this organization emerged the first rulers who would later be remembered as kings and eventually as pharaohs. The rise of Egypt was not the result of sudden conquest or the brilliance of one leader. Instead, it was a gradual process built over centuries of adaptation and innovation. Villages along the Nile began trading with one another, exchanging grain, pottery, and tools. The need for order grew stronger, and eventually small kingdoms formed, each ruling a stretch of the river. Rivalries and alliances shifted like the flow of the water until two powerful regions emerged in the north and the south. For generations, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north competed for dominance. Then came a moment that would change history forever. A leader from the south, known to later generations as Narmer or Menes, succeeded in uniting both regions. He created the first centralized kingdom in Egypt and established the foundation for dynasties that would endure for thousands of years. This act of unification was remembered as the birth of Egypt itself. From that point on, the pharaoh was not just a king but a divine ruler chosen by the gods to maintain balance and order across the land. Life in this newly unified kingdom revolved around the Nile. The river was the highway of the ancient world, carrying boats laden with stone, grain, and treasures from one end of the country to the other. It linked distant settlements and allowed communication across hundreds of miles. To live in Egypt was to live in harmony with the flow of the river, and every aspect of society reflected this connection. Festivals celebrated the annual flood, prayers were offered for abundant harvests, and even the calendar itself was shaped around the seasons of the Nile. As centuries passed, Egypt grew in strength and confidence. Leaders commissioned grand projects to display their power and secure their place in history. Monumental buildings rose from the desert floor, and the people who constructed them were not merely laborers but part of a collective vision to honor their rulers and gods. These structures became symbols of permanence and continuity in a world where life was often short and unpredictable. The idea was simple yet profound, that through stone and ritual one could achieve immortality. Behind the grandeur of temples and tombs, however, stood the everyday lives of ordinary Egyptians. Farmers tended fields from dawn until dusk, their work essential to feeding the kingdom. Craftsmen shaped pottery, carved statues, and wove textiles that filled markets with color and utility. Scribes learned to write using symbols that captured words and thoughts, giving Egypt one of the earliest forms of written communication. These hieroglyphs were not just practical tools, but also sacred instruments believed to carry divine power. To write was to bring ideas to life and to preserve the memory of both gods and men. In this world of balance between river and desert, between life and death, the Egyptians developed a worldview unlike any other. They saw existence as part of a grand cycle where order and chaos constantly struggled for dominance. Their pharaoh stood at the center of this struggle, a bridge between gods and people, a guardian of harmony. To them, the success of crops, the rise of the sun, and the stability of the kingdom all depended on the ruler fulfilling his sacred duty. This belief bound the society together and gave meaning to both grand monuments and humble daily tasks. It is here, in this beginning phase of Egypt's story, that the seeds of greatness were planted. A people who learned to work with their environment, a culture that celebrated both the earthly and the divine, and a kingdom that believed in the eternal balance of order and chaos. These foundations would support centuries of innovation, conquest, and cultural brilliance, ensuring that Egypt would not only survive but endure as one of the most enduring civilizations the world has ever known. With the kingdom firmly established, Egypt began to move beyond survival and into the realm of greatness. The pharaohs who ruled during the early dynasties sought to make their mark not only through leadership but through stone. The desert became a canvas on which they carved their legacy. Among the most striking achievements was the development of monumental architecture that would astonish the world for millennia. At first, rulers were buried in rectangular structures, known as mastabas, built from mud, brick, and stone. These tombs were simple but symbolized the idea that life after death was just as important as the present. Over time, architects experimented with design, seeking more lasting ways to honor their kings. It was during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser that a revolutionary idea emerged. His chief architect Imhotep envisioned a structure unlike any before. Layer by layer, he built a series of stone platforms that rose high into the sky, creating what we now call the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. This was the first monumental pyramid in Egypt, and it marked the beginning of a tradition that would define Egyptian identity. The pyramids that followed grew larger and more ambitious. In the Old Kingdom era, Pharaoh Sneferu perfected the smooth-sided pyramid, building not one but three during his reign. His son Khufu took the concept to unimaginable heights, constructing the Great Pyramid at Giza. Rising nearly 500 feet, it was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for thousands of years. It stood as a beacon of human ingenuity, requiring the labor of tens of thousands of workers and the careful planning of engineers who had mastered mathematics and astronomy. To the Egyptians, this was more than a tomb, it was a stairway to eternity. The Giza Plateau became a city of stone. Beside the pyramids rose temples for ritual offerings and tombs for nobles and officials who sought to rest near their divine ruler. The great Sphinx, with the body of a lion and the face of a king, gazed eternally toward the horizon, guarding the secrets of the pyramids. These wonders were built not only to glorify the pharaoh, but to ensure the continued balance of order in the universe. In their eyes, the stability of the kingdom and the success of the afterlife were bound together. Beyond architecture, Egypt's cultural achievements spread into every corner of life. Art flourished with vibrant paintings on tomb walls that told stories of daily activities, rituals, and journeys into the afterlife. Statues of gods and rulers captured both divine majesty and human likeness with astonishing detail. Every image carried meaning, for nothing in Egyptian art was created without purpose. A lotus blossom symbolized rebirth, a scarab beetle represented protection, a falcon signified divine kingship. These symbols wove together a visual language that has endured to this day. Writing also advanced into a powerful tool of governance and culture. Hieroglyphs recorded royal decrees, religious texts, and historical events. Scribes became essential members of society, holding knowledge that few others could access. They trained for years, memorizing hundreds of signs and mastering the art of combining them into words. To read and write was to wield power, for it allowed communication across generations. Texts like the pyramid texts inscribed inside royal tombs guided the deceased through the dangers of the afterlife, ensuring their safe passage to eternity. With writing came administration, and with administration came empire. The pharaohs organized their kingdom with precision, collecting taxes, overseeing agriculture, and directing massive construction projects. Officials managed provinces called nomes, each led by governors who reported to the throne. This bureaucracy allowed Egypt to function smoothly, even when the kingdom stretched hundreds of miles along the Nile. Trade routes expanded, bringing gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, and lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan. Egypt became a hub of wealth and connection, linking Africa, the Middle East, and beyond.
Religion lay at the heart of everything.
The Egyptians worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, each tied to natural forces and cosmic principles. Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky each day, bringing light and life before descending into the underworld each night.
Osiris
ruled the realm of the dead and symbolized resurrection, while his wife Isis embodied magic and protection. Horus, the falcon god, represented kingship and victory, while Anubis, the jackal-headed god, guided souls into the afterlife. Every temple, every festival, every act of devotion reinforced the belief that life was part of an eternal cycle where death was not an end but a transformation. Temples themselves became wonders of the ancient world. They were not only places of worship, but centers of community learning and economy. Priests performed daily rituals to honor the gods, bathing statues, clothing them in fine linens, and offering food and incense. To the people, these acts were not symbolic, but real sustenance for the divine. The continued favor of the gods depended on constant devotion. Festivals brought the community together with music, dance, and processions that filled the streets with color and sound. These events reminded everyone from farmer to noble that they were part of a divine order sustained by their gods and ruler. At the same time, ordinary Egyptians lived lives filled with both struggle and joy. Families worked together in the fields, planting and harvesting by the rhythm of the Nile. Children played with simple toys carved from wood or shaped from clay, while adults gathered to share food and drink. Music filled homes with harps, flutes, and drums. Stories were told of God's heroes and ancient battles around the fire at night. Though their rulers sought eternal glory, the daily lives of the people were no less meaningful. Their labor, their laughter, and their traditions formed the foundation upon which all of Egypt's greatness rested. By the Middle Kingdom, Egypt had endured periods of instability, but always found its way back to order. Pharaohs continued to sponsor art, literature, and architecture, while expanding influence into neighboring lands. Fortresses rose along the borders, temples multiplied, and the people of Egypt refined their identity as a civilization apart, unique in its beliefs and enduring in its achievements. They had built monuments to last forever and cultivated a culture that touched every part of life. Even in times of hardship, the Egyptian spirit endured, for their worldview taught them that order could always be restored, just as the Nile always returned with its life-giving flood.